Right now, somewhere beneath the Atlantic Ocean, a beam of light is traveling through a strand of glass thinner than a human hair, carrying a piece of data that left New York less than 30 milliseconds ago. It will arrive in London before I finish this sentence. You've heard of the cloud. You've seen the diagrams. Data floating wirelessly through the air, bouncing between satellites, hovering somewhere above us in a kind of digital ether. That picture is almost completely wrong. 99% of intercontinental internet traffic runs undersea, not through the air, not through space, through the ocean floor, carried by a few hundred strands of glass that get cut by accident around 200 times a year. This is how that system actually works, why it's far more fragile than anyone running it wants to admit. And the part almost nobody gets to, who owns it now. Start with the scale, because the numbers are hard to believe. There are 694 submarine cable systems in service right now, connected through 1,893 landing stations. As of early 2026, that's over 1.5 million kilometers of cable, enough to wrap around the planet roughly 37 times, most of it unburied, most of it completely invisible to the people whose lives depend on it. And satellites, including Starlink, they carry well under 1% of traffic between continents. A single modern cable carries more data than entire satellite constellations combined. The cloud is not in the sky, it's on the ocean floor. None of this is new. The first cable across the Atlantic was laid in 1858. When it worked, Queen Victoria sent a message to President Buchanan. 98 words, which took 16 and a half hours to transmit. 3 weeks later, the cable was dead. An engineer had cranked up the voltage, trying to speed up the signal, and burned out the insulation. That failure planted the question that would define the next century of this technology. How do you keep a signal alive across thousands of kilometers of ocean? Hold on to that. So, what are these cables actually? If you're picturing an enormous armored trunk line, the reality is going to surprise you in deep water. And that's 84% of the world's oceans. A telecom cable is 17 to 22 millimeters across, about the width of a garden hose. Every international message, every cross-border video call, every dollar of cloud computing moving between continents rides a tube that size, lying on the seabed. Peel back the layers and you get polyethylene, mylar tape, stranded steel wire, an aluminium water barrier, polycarbonate, and at the center, a copper tube. That copper tube matters. I'll come back to it. Inside it, packed in petroleum jelly, sit the optical fibers, each one roughly the width of a human hair. Data moves through them as laser pulses, light on, light off, with multiple wavelengths traveling down the same fiber simultaneously across multiple fiber pairs at once. A cable you could hold in one hand, carrying more information per second than any other technology ever built. Now, that copper tube. Here's the problem those 1858 engineers ran into. Light traveling through glass doesn't stay strong forever. The signal attenuates, scattering and absorbing into the glass as it goes. Over a few hundred kilometers, it degrades into noise. You'd lose it long before you reach the other side of the Atlantic. The solution is called a repeater, and they sit roughly every 60 to 100 kilometers along the cable. Each one holds a coil of fiber, 10 to 20 meters of it, doped with a rare earth element called erbium. A pump laser inside excites those erbium atoms. When the weakened signal passes through, the excited atoms release their stored energy directly into it at exactly the same wavelength. The light goes in dim and comes out bright, and critically, this is the part engineers are genuinely proud of. The signal is never converted to electricity, never decoded. The repeater doesn't read your data. It just makes the light stronger and passes it on. Light in, brighter light out, which raises an obvious question. How do you power a device sitting thousands of meters underwater with no access for maintenance, For a design life of 25 years, that's the copper tube. It carries thousands of volts of DC current fed from shore stations at both ends. Every repeater along the entire route taps power directly off that line. No batteries, no servicing, just a continuous electrical circuit stretching across an ocean, keeping a beam of light alive for thousands of kilometers. And it works. The Hibernia Express cable achieves a tested round trip between New York and London of under 59 milliseconds. The engineering is extraordinary. Here's where the wonder shifts into something else. Worldwide, about 200 undersea cables are cut or disrupted every year, most often for the most mundane reasons imaginable. Fishing trawlers, dragged anchors, a boat that didn't know the cable was there or didn't care. Fishing gear and anchoring account for 86% of all faults. Anchors alone cause roughly 60 incidents a year. 200 a year sounds manageable until you learn what a repair involves. A ship sails to the fault, drags a grapnel across the seabed to hook the cable, cuts it, and hauls one severed end to the surface before going back for the other. A new section gets spliced in on deck and lowered back down. Average repair time is 10 to 20 days, and 4 to 6 weeks without a pre-positioned vessel, sometimes months if weather or permitting gets in the way. And here's the number that makes all of this feel precarious. There are only about 60 cable repair vessels operating globally, 60 ships for 1.5 million kilometers of cable carrying 99% of the world's intercontinental data cut 200 times a year. Most of those cuts are genuinely accidental. But in 2024 and 2025, something started happening in the Baltic Sea that didn't look like bad luck. In mid-November 2024, 2 undersea cables in the Baltic were severed within 24 hours of each other. The BCS East-West Interlink between Sweden and Lithuania, and Sea Lion, one between Finland and Germany. Investigations focused on a bulk carrier, the Yipeng 3, which had been near both. And it wasn't isolated. Since 2023, there have been at least 11 cases of cable damage around Taiwan, and at least 11 in the Baltic. Here's what makes this so difficult to respond to. A negligent anchor drag and a deliberate one leave identical evidence: a cut cable and a ship that happened to be nearby. Investigations have found negligence, poor maintenance, opaque ownership, but none has produced proof of a government ordering an attack, and the damage has not been conclusively attributed to any party. That may be the entire point. An action indistinguishable from an accident is almost impossible to deter and almost impossible to retaliate against. You can't respond to something you can't prove, and the cables keep getting cut. There's one more layer to this, and it's the part almost nobody gets to. For decades, submarine cables were funded and built by international consortia of telecom carriers with a strong public utility ethos. That era is over. Google now holds an ownership stake in 34 cable systems, Meta in 20, Microsoft and Amazon in about 10 more between them. Hyperscalers' share of international bandwidth has gone from almost nothing in 2010 to roughly 75% today. They control about 90% of transatlantic capacity, and they're involved in over 2/3 of all planned deployments. So, the physical infrastructure carrying 99% of the world's intercontinental data is now predominantly owned by 4 American companies. Not governments, not international bodies, 4 corporations, each with their own commercial interests, their own routing decisions, their own security posture. So, here's where we land. The actual physical internet is a few hundred glass threads the width of a garden hose lying unburied on the ocean floor, cut about 200 times a year, powered by a copper wire carrying thousands of volts, repaired by a fleet of 60 ships, and owned increasingly by 4 companies headquartered in the same country. The engineering is genuinely beautiful. Light goes in one side of the Atlantic and comes out the other, amplified by erbium atoms, powered from shore, arriving in under 60 milliseconds. It's one of the most remarkable things we have ever built. It's also far thinner than anyone imagines. And that gap between the wonder and the fragility is what nobody is talking about loudly enough. If this changed how you think about something you use every day, subscribe. This channel is built around exactly this kind of mechanism first explainer. And there's a lot more coming.